Lisa, welcome to the show.
Great, glad to be here.
Thank you so much. It's something I know I've been talking to you about for a while, and I'm so glad we get to sit down because the topic we're going to get into, supply chain, certainly affects everybody across so many, and it affects so many platforms. And it's really, besides COVID, supply chain is really at the top of everybody's mind today. People who know nothing about supply chain are talking about supply chain. And so I thought it's a great time we get into this. I did a Google search. I just typed supply chain and over 1.5 billion results came up. So it's certainly being looked at and researched. And so I can't wait to hear from you about your insight and experience, especially over the last 2 years or so. Now, the supply chain really encompasses, when we're talking supply chain, from a very layman standpoint, we're talking about the manufacturers, the vendors, warehouses, transportation.
Yep.
Right? And that could be sea, land, or air, and distribution centers, and of course, the retailers. So is that correct so far?
Absolutely true. I usually it always has to start at the customer. And really, I look at customer. I mean, there's generally speaking multiple customers. And then, like you said, there's transportation, warehousing, logistics. It depends where it's coming from. All sorts of it could be several manufacturers involved. And then your suppliers and your suppliers. That whole chain is what I generally speaking would refer to in supply chain, which is why everyone has such trouble getting a handle around it, because it's not a small topic.
It's not a small topic. There's so many moving parts on it. So we're here with one of the foremost experts in supply chain. And Lisa, I would love to start with a little background on really what or who kind of brought us into, who were the main culprits of the supply chain disruption?
Well, the pandemic really is what threw us into chaos in the first place. I mean, we had the Amazon effect going on prior to the pandemic, and we had, which meant that everybody wanted products immediately and quickly, and there was some concerns about that, and then there was the tariffs, but really everything was still in alignment. So when the pandemic started, it threw the supply chain into misalignment, because in essence, like we shut down in the US at one point. Product was still coming in from China because they had shut down earlier, but we're back running. And so if you think about it that way, they were sending us product, we were shut down. When we were shut down, they were, vice versa. And then there weren't people at the ports to offload product because we were shut down. They did open up sooner rather than later, because they were considered essential. But then you have to worry about trucks and where were the trucks. And so there was actually a whole bunch of product that had come in from before we went into the pandemic that may not even be the right products anymore. And then we eventually had to get them all to warehouses, which we did. But from there, everything just got completely out of alignment, because basically the wrong products were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that was true for the equipment as well. So like, for example, chassis, which goes underneath, it's how you pull product off the containers. Like we had chassis on products in warehouses, and they weren't where they needed to be once we had more product arriving. So in essence, everything was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So the pandemic started the process. Mm-hmm. Now you might be asking, further, that the pandemic is not the only cause of the process, though, or only cause of the issue, because one thing after another did start happening. So after we started like leveling out from the pandemic anyway, and we started, volume started increasing. First of all, the pandemic caused people, if you just think about it from a consumer point of view, it's caused us to try new things, like food items, as an example. If they were out, we bought a different type of food. The same thing was true with toilet paper. You know, like we ran out, everyone was panic buying toilet paper, and run out of toilet paper, you try something new. And there's also, that also gets you into another cause, which is commercial production of toilet paper, like to supply, like, let's say a hotel, versus retail, which is, you know, nicely packaged toilet paper that we'd buy for our houses. Well, the house toilet paper went up dramatically, also because we were panicking for no reason, but not because we actually needed more toilet paper during the day, but we weren't going to work. And so, you know, like the commercial toilet paper there was an abundance, but it doesn't flow through the same supply chain channels as does the retail, and it's not packaged the same. So you can't, so, you know, that was just like a good example of retail versus commercial, and how that alone can mix up a supply chain, even if you had the same amount of demand.
That's super interesting. And I don't think a lot of people thought about that. So if back, I would say a year ago, maybe, or some point in 2020, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being there was complete disruption, a tremendous amount of pain we were all feeling in the supply chain, like you were talking about getting supplies. Back then we were a 10. Where would you say we are today?
Well, we're probably still pretty high, like it maybe an 8, but in a different way, because when the pandemic first started, we were panic buying, which was the main reason, in addition to the commercial retail problem. Obviously now most people have gone back to work, although some are permanently working from home, but you know, we've figured that out. But the reason I brought that up is that as we tried new products, whether you're as a person, a consumer, or a business, some of those stuck. Like we decided, you know what, this person was loyal, the product is about the same price, or maybe we even pay a little more, but if they're reliable, we're going to stick with it. So the thing is that the supply chain is based upon what everyone thought we were selling before. Now, trying to figure out what every consumer and business is changing their mind to purchase is a whole different equation. And as we get back out there and start, you know, working again or I should say playing, working, whatever, you know, the demand is increasing. So it's creating further complications, and it's continuing to change the demand pattern. So basically the amount of product that we used to need is no longer what's needed today. If you look at it, even at like a, you know, product by product it's never easy. But even if you look at it like retail versus commercial for this particular type of product or brand, let's say, it's not going to be the same. So there's been a volatility in the demand side of the equation that has not gone away. And we've had more disruptions on supply, because beyond the pandemic, we also had the Suez Canal being blocked, which caused people again to reroute and go a different way, further causing changes to the supply chain. So like all of this stuff adds up. And then there was the Texas storms last year, creating more demand for things that like are used to replace pipes, let's say, because they froze. And it's also delaying all the truckers that were in Texas, if you will, at the time, because they couldn't, because of all the snow and ice and everything. And then also the oil and gas production was, you know, and anything that Texas is known for producing, if your supplier happens to be there, but oil and gas, obviously, which affects a lot of products. So that caused further disruptions in that side of things. And then if you think about a recent event, we have the Canadian trucker convoys, which caused some issues as far as the bridges go, so back and forth. But more importantly, it's not as though we have enough truckers to begin with. So if they are protesting, politely protesting, they're not driving their truck to take it somewhere it needs to go. And that's a problem, because we have so few people, because the Great Resignation has also been occurring. So it's a confluence of factors. So I mean, you know, I say 8 because from the very beginning of the pandemic, it was like really insane. Like most clients went from like 100%, like let's just call it a standard operating, to like most of my clients that are manufacturers, so they would
Mhm.
continue operating, went to, you know, between 50 and 70% of the volume early on, because they had it, most of all of them had a dip early on because it was so new. But then some of them, of course, the ones that produce things that relate to the pandemic, they would go up by like 300% or something. So, you
Mhm.
know, that was pretty dramatic. So compared to that, we certainly have leveled out, but that's rather, that's like comparing to the worst case scenario. So, you know, that leveled out pretty quick. I'd say a couple of months down the line, we knew what we were doing, and we had essential businesses working and that kind of thing. It hasn't gotten better since then. It's just gotten different. Does that make
Wow.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, with on that note, there's been so much change, and I'm surprised to hear you say that we're still at a really a level 8 in terms of our disruption level, 10 being the worst, that we're kind of still at an 8 out there. I think myself included, I think a lot of people would thinking that we were maybe down 4 or 5, but it's interesting to hear from somebody who's really on the ground and in the trenches with this stuff. So we still have a ways to go.
Yep.
And from what you were just saying, so I guess there's two questions. One, which which sectors of the supply chain really pivoted the quickest to adjust? Because some are still trying to
Yep.
figure it out. Some have moved faster. And then what what things would you say have permanently changed in the way people approach supply chain due to COVID? And you can answer those two questions in either order.
Okay. Well, um, so I'll answer the first one in a couple of different ways. So some of the industries that have changed more significantly than others, which isn't necessarily better or worse, but like for example, building and construction products, you know, their volume like went up like no tomorrow, because people were thinking, hey, I'm at home anyway, I may as well like live in a nicer space, work out of a nicer space. Now they're thinking that I may not go back to work, so I may as well live in a nicer space. So all of building and construction kind of products has been on a high, and it hasn't calmed down. The only thing that's been happening, and this kind of relates to something that's permanent, is that the because we have had so many supply chain disruptions, and because the volume has increased, we have price inflation. So inflation is definitely hitting that business, as an example. And it's you know, they're passing it on to customers, and it, you know, once they pass it on to a customer, the supply chain is not likely to bring their prices back down. So it's largely baked in. I mean, there might be something that can reduce, you know, you might be able to reduce costs somewhere along the line, but
Hmm.
largely speaking, most manufacturers and distributors didn't pass on price increases unless they had to. So like they tried to absorb some in the first place,
Uh-huh.
just like losing margin. So because they knew that once they pass it on, it was going to be hard to like go backwards, like with their
Mm.
investors and their boards and
Mhm.
things. So,
Mhm.
you know, inflation has been built into the product, and I don't see it going away for many reasons, because the workforce is still like, we just don't have enough people. More and more people are retiring, not less and less.
Mhm.
People are changing careers, not necessarily wanting to be in the manufacturing, distribution, construction type of businesses.
Mhm.
And so, you know, they're thinking, heck, if I'm gonna, you know, if I have the chance of dying anyway, I may as well just do something I always loved, whatever that is. So, you know, that's an issue. And so there's less people, and I see people changing where they're sourcing supply. They've realized that there's too much lead time built into their supply chains in a general point of view. So like if they were getting product from Asia, they've realized that they're very dependent on somebody that's far away, and may, like, when China shut down, as an example, they did
Mhm.
not necessarily prioritize our customers. And like
Mhm.
Australia, I have
Mhm.
I'm in contact with some consultants from Australia as well. Like
Mhm.
Australia was just cut out. Like they just, you know, they prioritized what was most profitable for them, if you will. China did.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I mean, it's not surprising, but
Mhm.
people weren't thinking that that was going to happen. So now that they've realized, hey, this is a problem, I might lose customers because I don't have what I need when I need it. They're taking control of their supply chain. And that can mean several things. It could be that they're reshoring, and they are. It could be that they're nearshoring, like to Mexico or somewhere,
Mhm.
if your customers are here. But it also means that they have backup suppliers. They're supplementing maybe they're supplementing their overseas supply. They're you know, they're prioritizing customers. They're saying, you know what, let's see which customers are most profitable, which products are profitable, and they're getting rid of the items that they don't need to keep anymore. Same with the restaurants, right? Like you go to a restaurant and half the stuff that I used to order, they'd say, oh, we don't carry that anymore. Well, it's the same thing with businesses. So they're rationalizing their items, if you will, to the ones that they want in their go forward portfolio. But
Mhm.
that's changing the supply chain further. So does that make sense? So those are some of the things that are
Yeah. So
staying in
like,
place.
a permanent change then, Lisa, would be some of these companies are looking to use different sources of manufacturing, different places, and sort of re-looking at the whole picture of the product, right? And
Yep.
those are some changes that are going to be with companies probably forever now.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're, you know, they're changing more to a regional, they're trying to do more of a regional cluster. So meaning that, you know, like they need to bring their suppliers and their manufacturers if they were producing in Asia,
Hmm.
closer together. But even if they're here, they're thinking, you know what, if I could get a backup source of supply that's in the same region as my you know, my manufacturing source, even if they're outsourcing to somebody here, they need to have, you know, a more flexible or an agile supply chain. So they're moving more in general to like a regional cluster idea. With that said, though, they're not telling people that's what they're doing, because why would you? It just means you won't get prioritized while you're trying to set up your new supply chain. So
Hmm.
that's causing more changes, and like it's bound to leave too much inventory in the wrong places and too little inventory in others, right? Because the whole supply chain is out of alignment still, and is
Hmm.
bound to get more out of alignment as these changes happen for a while until things level out. But
Hmm.
this is overall. Like I see individual companies taking control of the supply chain successfully, but overall the global supply chain is still terribly out of alignment. And that reminds me of the question you asked earlier, but I started telling you an example of the building products industry. But you asked which companies or segments perform better than others. I would say that generally speaking, it was more company dependent, but the ones that had cash had more of an ability to make quicker changes and build some agility into their problem duplication or agility into their process. So generally speaking, larger
Hmm.
companies have more cash. This is
Hmm.
generally speaking,
Right.
because believe me, I've worked with several clients that are large that don't, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, the larger companies had more cash, whereas the smaller ones did not, which was
Hmm.
really a big problem, because if you think about it, they have to be placing orders far in advance. Now you have even more delays and disruptions, so you're out cash for a longer period of time, and if you can't
Hmm.
survive during that time, you're in trouble. So the smaller
Hmm.
companies that didn't have a good cash position struggled.
Hmm.
And then the other part of this, though, is people who were able to change quickly to changing circumstances, which generally speaking are the more innovative companies. Well, you know, like generally speaking, it's easier to innovate in a smaller company. Of course, some of the larger companies have pockets of innovation and they did just fine too. So
Hmm.
these are general statements. So in a way, two things are going against each other. So like generally the larger companies have more cash, that's good. But also generally they're more bureaucratic and less
Right.
innovative, that's bad, if you will.
Right.
So really what ended up happening is if you were on any of those extremes, then you performed, but it was really all up to who are the leaders and how strong was the individual company. So I see the strong companies getting stronger and the weaker companies getting weaker and actually like going out of business. Similar to the Great Depression, I see more companies succeeding and or failing or being absorbed than ever before.
So nobody saw this coming, right? Nobody could have ever imagined we'd
No.
have this type of mess. So, as all businesses, all companies like to have contingency plans, they like to prepare for things that, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, right? So now, what have you seen, or maybe what are you advising companies to do to prepare for the next disruption? Because there will be something at some point. It might not be for 20 years or 15 years, or maybe it could be in another 5 years. We don't know, but something bound's going to happen. Have companies done anything specifically to make preparations for another disruption disaster?
Yeah, yes, I think that basically companies are looking at they're, because this was such a big event, they have realized that they have to prepare more for these types of events. And it doesn't have to be, it could be weather related, it could be conflict related, all of which seem problematic at the moment.
Yeah.
It could just be changing demand, all those types of reasons. So they have realized they need to be more prepared. And to your point, generally speaking, the larger companies have always had contingency plans, but what it is that I find that they were more contingency plans in like name only, meaning that they didn't actually test them out with any sort of volume to see if it would really if they would come through. Because when everybody is down and out, like how good is your backup plan? But now people are realizing that there's a problem. So they are keeping strategic stockpiles of inventory. Some of them are just keeping more inventory across the board. They're probably going to have the opposite problem because they'll start running out of cash because they won't be able to sell all this inventory they have. But strategic inventory is a smart thing to do. But strategic capacity is also a smart thing to do, which basically means, you may have extra people, which sounds like something that taboo. No one would ever do that. But for a particular, like a machine shop, because machine shops tend to be like the bottleneck in manufacturers, they should be keeping some extra people with extra skills. That doesn't mean they sit there and twiddle their thumbs. They can run other pieces of equipment. It's just that they are paying them more to do so because they're more skilled. Well, so that's a cost that they'll have to start accounting for. But they're going to have to, it's just one option. Another is use of technology. So using like 3D printing and, like some of the like automation, robotics. I mean, there's different ways you can go where you can increase your output and those types of things. So people are pursuing technology. And they're also, planning for, like they're putting in a program that's called SIOP, which is Sales Inventory Operations Planning. I'm seeing that the clients that are putting that type of a program in place, which basically means we're planning for what their future demand is really going to be, which is tricky in this environment, but you can get to a better picture of what future demand is likely to be. And then you figure out how you best fulfill that. And you look at, should I make or should I buy? Should I raise prices? What should I do? So they can get ahead of it. They're getting more successful than the rest.
So you had mentioned technology for a second, and I'd love, Lisa, to shift a little bit away from some of the problems and into technology, because technology is so great. It's obviously getting into every industry in the world today. Some are more advanced than others, but we're all kind of got to be on board with it. So I'm curious to learn what you're seeing in the supply chain world in terms of technology. Is there any specific hot pieces of technology, and or in the supply chain world, like the vendors, warehouses, transportation, who's using new technology, AI, or what have you? Who's really kind of wrapped their arms around it first and said, yes, this is going to help us improve, our line of communication, our logistics, the finances, or whatever. So what is it we're seeing, and who's really kind of wrapping their arms around it?
Well, so I see that, well, people are trying all sorts of different technologies, but the ones that are probably most applicable here are, well, first of all, one that's widespread is upgrading their ERP systems or making sure that they're using more of their ERP systems, which is the system that they use to ship, receive, track inventory, and produce, that type of thing. The modern ERP systems have more functionality where they can like tailor to the customer's request and tailor to provide a superior customer experience, as well as automate repetitive tasks and allow it just makes a lot of sense to have to implement more of that type of technology. And so I'm seeing that there's a lot of interest in ERP systems, both better utilizing the information and upgrading.
Upgrading, yeah, that's probably a big, okay.
Absolutely. And then related to that is data. So data is a big topic right now. So how do we better utilize data coming from the system so they can make good decisions? You can figure out which customers are profitable, and which products make sense, and where you should focus your price increases, and which production lines are more effective than the others. So there's a data analysis element, which is oftentimes seen in like business intelligence type applications, like a Power BI or something like that. And so there is, that's become very popular. And then that's led to clients have to get a better handle on their data, and making sure that their data is, just getting more data quicker could lead you to make faster, incorrect decisions. So, is your data directionally correct? Is leading to that topic. But then once you get beyond that point, they're actually looking at predictive analytics. So that's taking your data to the next point. Instead of doing like preventative maintenance on a machine, you can predict where your machine is going to break down and do maintenance on what's going to happen instead of what has happened or something that you're thinking might happen. So it's a, and that's kind of using AI, which is artificial intelligence, as well as, your data. A lot of these types of topics all relate though to your ERP system, and then tied into that, they have elements of AI for artificial intelligence, like predicting cash flow, predicting forecast, those types of things, as well as IoT, so Internet of Things. I mean, really, when you're capturing what's happening on your production line, it's an Internet of Things application, and you bring that data into the same, data pool as what you have in your system, as an example.
Okay. Now, I got to imagine then there's probably a lot of startup companies in that space trying to get better and outdo one another. Are you seeing that, or do you not touch into that, but trying to improve the ERP systems and the analytics? Are there a lot of young companies out there trying to get in on it?
That it's more the same story as the other is that the progressive companies are thinking about this, and the rest are like thinking, when will the supply chain get better? I'm going to wait for that to happen. And they're thinking the same things about their system. Like, I don't know. Everyone's too busy to do it right now, so I think I'll do it later. So the smart keep getting smarter, the weak keep getting weaker, if you will. So I'm not necessarily seeing a specific trend, but I am seeing a trend that moreover I don't know, like you could say the medium proactive companies to the proactive are looking at something. They're doing something with their ERP system. They're trying to use their ERP system. They're working with consultants to figure out how do they improve a process.
Yeah.
Or they are looking at the Internet of Things. A lot of them are looking at 3D printing also, because if you think about it, 3D printing, robotics, and automation are popular as well in certain industries. It doesn't make sense to do it if it's not going to actually help you make some meaningful improvements. But if you can, like, eliminate a person, if you will, on your production floor, and maybe one that was standing right next to another one. So you have
Mm-hmm.
more distance between people as well. But if you
Mm-hmm.
think about, if you're moving from China, like instead of having all those extra people that cost little small amounts of money, theoretically, although they've been increasing their labor costs in China, but instead of that, why not just hire a few people and automate the process? So they're looking at, when they're bringing production back, how can they automate it? How can they utilize equipment and machinery instead of lower paid people that that have workers' comp claims and those types of things. So anything that relates to how do I automate a task, whether that's through ERP or it's a robotic or something like that, those are popular
Those are
topics.
popular. Okay.
But it's really just the progressive companies that are doing them. And
Mm-hmm.
those particular companies that support like ERP upgrades. Like one of the things that I do in addition to helping folks from a process point of view, and really the SIOP topic is a sweet spot, is help people select ERP systems. So I'm seeing an increase in companies saying, you know what, I got to get onto a new higher level, like a better base, because my
Okay.
base is no longer going to be sufficient.
It's no longer sufficient. Yeah. So Lisa, you've been around a very long time, and in a good way,
Yeah,
you've
that's
seen a
true.
lot. And so I'm curious to ask you something that you used to believe to be true in the supply chain world that you no longer believe.
Well, I mean, that's a great topic. I think that, I think you're always evolving. So that's a really good question, but I can't think about, right. Nothing comes to mind. I'm
Okay.
sure that for sure, like no one is, whatever you call it. No one's an oracle when it comes to figuring out the supply chain, me included, that's for sure. So, I think I probably thought about the supply chain more in a linear progression, like supply chain has been known as a chain, meaning like
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of links, there's suppliers, customers, etc. But I think what's happened, and no one could have predicted this, is that lots of those chains are changing all at once. And so that's like, and they're branching out, in different directions, because you can take over with technology, or you're everything is changing about this. So I guess
Yeah.
that's one thing that I wouldn't have predicted to happen, because, who knew that the pandemic was going to happen? I was thinking more along the lines of like the Amazon effect, which is still happening. I mean, the move to e-commerce, where
Mm-hmm.
you have smaller packages arriving more often,
Mm-hmm.
and the customer experience, like everyone is thinking, I need everything now.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, now people are thinking, I just need it, period. And they've accepted that they have to wait longer at the
Mm-hmm.
current time, but it's going to go
Mm-hmm.
back.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's
Okay.
I think that would be the thing I would say, is that all the chains are changing at once, would be something that I didn't expect to happen.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So Lisa, just a few more questions before we kind of wind down. What is your outlook for the remainder of 2022?
Well, I think that some elements of, well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what happens with Ukraine and all sorts of world events, because I mean, the thing is that it does seem like from the pandemic point of view, some of that volume will start to level out. However, as I said, people are reshoring, they're changing their supply chain, and all sorts of things are happening, which will keep the volatility levels high. So I've been saying all along that I don't see us getting caught up, if you will, in
Mm-hmm.
2022. I don't even necessarily think we should be thinking about it at all. I think we should be thinking about how do we take control of our individual supply chain. So it's so hard to figure out what is happening across the globe. Instead, we should just say, who are our customers and who are their customers?
Mm-hmm.
And who are our suppliers and our suppliers' suppliers? And what do we do to get our arms around that? And change it so that it's more flexible and it delivers quickly, more flexibly, and it's more secure and we have backup options. That's something we can get a handle on. But I see some of the smarter proactive companies doing that, but I am concerned because it depends on what happens with world events here. But like I said, the supply chain is dependent, as we've gone global, on world events like the Ukraine situation, what's could be going on in Taiwan, and that relates to computer chips, which is just a horrendous problem because some of these issues, like first of all, oil and natural gas relates to a significantly higher number of products than anyone really realizes, and it cannot be substituted with anything environmentally friendly today. But that doesn't mean that we won't say it can. But there's just no way to do it today. So that's a big problem, and that's what the Ukraine-Russia situation is all about. So we have more complications there. And then if Taiwan gets involved, now we have computer chips, which leads from everything to ovens, because I was on a call with the baking industry, and they have computer chips now, to cars, to like computers, like it's a widespread
everything's computer, a refrigerator, a dishwasher.
Everything.
I mean, yeah, it's
and that's just the conflicts worldwide, let alone who knows what, like tornadoes, earthquakes, other weather situations, and or other pandemic, or other surges or something. So the way I see it is, I'm sure something will level out somewhere along the line because it has to. However, with the Great Resignation as well thrown into the mix, we better, if you want to be successful, don't even think about all that stuff. You just better start taking control of your supply chain.
Great. I love that. Love that. I'll make a note. Take control of your supply chain. I mean, that's great. That's great.
I mean, it really. I mean,
yeah,
even
for
like I'm
any
sitting here thinking,
manufacturers, distributors, or people that have clients in that world, take control of your supply chain. Take the action on it. I love that. So really, we have a ways to go before we kind of get out of that. 2022 is still not going to be pretty in the supply chain world. All right, great. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to read a couple of numbers, Lisa, and then I'll back into it. 30 years of experience in consulting with your clients in the manufacturing and supply chain world. Over 100 clients, contracts, 1,059 publications. That's very impressive. And over 23 different types of awards, accolades. You are an author, a speaker, you're certainly an influencer in your industry, you're a consultant, and you have a lot going on. You've done a lot. I read your blogs, and you're constantly publishing content, which is fantastic. So I'm really curious to hear what a typical day looks like for Lisa Anderson.
Well, that's a really good question. So I would say that it's heavily dependent on the types of clients that I have at the time, but probably something like 5 to 6 hours of the day relates to client particular calls. Like since the pandemic, the good news is that a lot of what we've been able to do virtually, and the clients actually get better results sooner. So that's great. And then we throw in a workshop or something in person from time to time where it's meaningful change, or like it'll add value to the equation. So I would say, like, it could be multiple clients, definitely is multiple clients that I'm working with, but sitting on team calls, doing something one way or another, reviewing a process, talking about next steps for an implementation. And then I would say and this is just like if we're talking about a standard 8-hour day, which by no means are some of them the standard 8 hours days, but that, and then we have the activities in order to gain clients. So that's going to be things like, well, actually all the things you mentioned. So like writing articles, like doing podcasts like this one, talking to potential clients, putting together proposals, those types of activities are going to take up some time during the day too. But it's it depends. Some days, might do a few hours of those types of activities.
Hmm.
So that might writing a newsletter. So those are tasks that go on, as well as like admin sort of tasks, right? Because you have to be able to do things like do your
Hmm.
books, know where you're spending money, pay
Hmm.
bills,
Hmm.
work with subcontractors, right? So I bring in resources to projects.
Hmm.
I have a data model type of
Hmm.
analyst
Okay.
behind the scenes, and those types of things. So there's coordination with those types of resources, and as well. So those, I would say those, at least off the top of my head, those are the
Right.
three main types of activities. But the 80/20 is client work, but it really needs to be a significant, like, some days are more than the rest. I might spend some days where like half the day is working on the types of tasks to make sure that you have clients in the future pipeline. But another days, like, I might not spend anything. So it just depends.
Do you, in terms of your content writing, your blogs and articles, do you set a specific time or day of the week to work on that, or is it only when free time comes up? How do you schedule that?
Well, I mean, that would be probably the best way to do it. But what I've done is I have a few things that work for me. They may not work for everyone, but like I've gotten back to doing this. Like last year, it became so insane I had to miss some months. But generally speaking, I've been doing a monthly newsletter where I make sure that I talk to. I usually have some speeches that I've given, some articles that I've gotten published, and I've been
Hmm.
quoted in different places. And so that's a nice way to make sure that I'm continuing to do those types of
Hmm.
activities, because I
Hmm.
relate to them in my on my monthly newsletter. So that's one thing I do to keep track. But I would say that, generally speaking, the good news is that I've been doing this for so long that I have people coming to me to suggest, largely speaking, coming to me to suggest, like, would you like to speak at this event?
Right.
Or could you provide us a quote on this type of a story, which is great. So those really, they do come up as they come up. And really, I've been fortunate to have them come up, because I used to have to spend all sorts of time to get them. And to some
Hmm.
degree, I still do spend a little time, but I more often than not, they're coming to me, which is awesome. So it's keeping that going, but that means that they're a little ad hoc. Whereas the my weekly newsletters and or monthly newsletters, I, generally speaking, will try to fit it in during the weekend. To be honest with you, I fit it in where I have time, because I
Hmm.
prioritize my clients and other things, and I might just stay up late to do it, or
Hmm. Hmm.
something like that.
Okay. Okay. And so, if people want to find the newsletter, Lisa, where can they receive your newsletter, subscribe to it, and they want to learn more about the, what's going on in the manufacturing, distribution, and logistics world? Where
Well,
do
you
they
can
find?
go to my website, and that's LMA hyphen or dash, whichever you want to call it, consulting group, all one word.com. And on my website, you'll find that I have special reports. I just put together a special report for, I do it at the beginning of each year. It's sort of like a predictions and what you should be focused on. So I just sent one out, and it's a free download, as well as you can sign up for my newsletters. And they're all free as well. So
Was
you
that
can
the
find all my newsletters on my website.
on your website? So repeat that. So repeat it again. The
Sure,
website.
it's L as in Lisa, M as in Mary, A as in Apple, hyphen consulting group, all one
Mhm.
word.com. I'm
Okay.
also on LinkedIn, and that
Hmm.
that is it's LMA Consulting Group Incorporated for my company, but I'm also on as a person, and that's Lisa Anderson LMA,
Hmm.
all one word. And I definitely publish all my newsletter articles, and that's a great way to stay connected as well, and to see podcasts and those types of things.
Yeah, LinkedIn, I find for a lot of the people in the business world, is a great way to get started, to connect with people. They just go in and type Lisa Anderson. They could
Yep.
find the LMA Consulting Group. They could connect with you there. And I know you publish a lot on LinkedIn. There's a lot of great resources and articles that Lisa shares. I know I've read a lot of those, and it's a great way to stay up in the supply chain world. I know, Lisa, you're also very active on Twitter, which
Yep.
I love to see. I know a lot of our provisor colleagues are not so much on Twitter, and I do try to get them to be on it a little bit more. I know you have a really good following there. So at
That's true.
Lisa Anderson LMA, at Lisa Anderson LMA. If you're a Twitter person, connect with Lisa, follow Lisa. A lot of good content there, again, and about the supply chain world. And so those are two great places, a lot of good content to help yourself improve and learn in this world. And Lisa does a great job of sharing that. So Lisa, before we conclude, I just have two more questions for you. We ask all of our guests these questions because this is a heavily skewed greater Los Angeles, Southern California based podcast. And the first question is, share with us your favorite place to visit or thing to do in, say, the greater LA or LA County.
Okay, so greater LA or LA County. Well, I would say, well, I do like to go to a play every now and then. So like at the Pantages or something like that. Or like an event, like this isn't telling you favorite, but I would say, like an event like that, or like a game at, I don't know what, Dodger Stadium or somewhere. But I also, haven't done it in several years, but like something like Universal Studios would be fun too. So
yeah.
And actually LA County has the beach too, right? So I mean, the nice thing is there's so many options there, but I would say, who knows? I actually might like to go to Malibu, the best out of all those places, but it just depends. I wouldn't do that like all the time.
Oh my God. I was just in Malibu actually the last 2 weekends, and you're so right about that. Yesterday was a gorgeous day, and living here in Los Angeles in the middle of winter, I drove my car down to the beach yesterday to Malibu. I have an old sports car, and they do this thing called Cars and Coffee at the Malibu Bluffs Park right across the street from Pepperdine. And so I got there at 7 in the morning, and it was a gorgeous Sunday, and there were just dozens and dozens of people lining up, all kinds of different sports cars, old muscle cars, and it was so fun. And then when I drove home, I live in the San Fernando Valley, so I took PCH all the way down from Malibu to Santa Monica. Nice. And it was just, it's so beautiful. It's still, I grew up here in LA, and I'm an LA native, and I lived in Malibu years and years ago after college. And I still, still driving down that PCH coastline, especially on days where the ocean's glistening, it's sunny, and it's still so breathtaking. It never gets old, and it's just, I agree. It's so therapeutic. Yeah.
I agree. Cause actually during the pandemic, it was about a year ago, I went to Malibu and stayed there, and it was nice. I stayed right on the ocean. And it was just a great, it was just nice to be right there on the ocean. I like to, eat lunch or something on the pier or somewhere.
Oh my God. I just ate lunch for the first time on the pier, and maybe it's been 20 years. My wife, it was my birthday about a month ago, and so my wife surprised me for an overnight actually at the Malibu Beach Inn. And
that's where I went. It's nice, isn't it?
So gorgeous.
It is.
Oh my God, it was so nice.
I love sitting on their back patio.
Yeah. Oh, the patio. We had breakfast there, brunch, and so amazing. And you can walk over to the pier, and there's some cute restaurants there as well.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Yes, Malibu. Everybody.
So I guess that's now my new favorite. I actually, after in talking about it, I had to think about it. That would probably be my favorite out of all those activities. But of course, the other ones are nice too.
Well, we are very spoiled here in LA that we have so many great choices. So, Lisa, final question is, so with all of this, there is so much room for improvement. If you could ask the listeners to do something to help make, I'm just going to say Los Angeles or LA County a better place, right, for all of us, what would you like to ask people to do?
As it's related to the supply chain or just in general? In
general.
Wow. Well, I mean, I guess to your point, you have to start with something tangible. So, I think, well, let's just say as it relates to the supply chain, because
Yeah, supply
there
chain.
is a significant amount of need in LA County for sure, and LA County is be surprising, but it is actually pretty prevalent in the supply chain world because you have the ports right there as well. So I would say is to talk to your supply chain partners, and really in your field too. I mean, I was just talking about building and construction products because it's one of the industries that I work with a lot, but it actually relates a lot to what you do, Anthony. And in order for you to be successful, even with commercial real estate, we have to get a handle on what's happening here. So I would say, if nothing else, start to talk to your supply chain partners. It could just be as simple as your customers, your suppliers, your your trucker, whatever. I mean, it depends on what you could be. Anything. You could be hospitality or whatever, but talk to somebody in your supply chain and start to learn more about what is even happening in your supply chain. It may lead you to be able to, from a business standpoint, improve your service to your customers and, get a better handle on it. So I think we all need to, it's been a mystery for so long that now that we understand that supply chain is at least something that's getting blamed on a lot of the problems, we may as well start to understand it a bit more.
That's great. Well, I hope, no, I thank you for sharing that. And I love that answer. And I think I think people don't do enough of that. And I hope after people listen to this, our conversation today, that people have a little better understanding of sort of the global picture and the intricacies of what's involved and how companies are trying to position themselves. So you shared a lot. Thank you for sharing such great insight into your world and a world that really affects all of us. So Lisa, before we sign off, is there anything else that you would like to share or say or plug before we end our conversation?
Well, as it relates to the LA area, I would say that we probably need to gain a better appreciation. And this isn't to say that LA is not, but just given what's happening in the supply chain world in LA County, I think we probably have to gain a better appreciation for truckers and the complications of the more we all order products that we want delivered to our houses, which is called e-commerce, the more challenging it is because we have to figure out a way to deliver to thousands of people instead of one warehouse, as an example. And the supply chain is getting more and more complex because we have so many moving parts. So I think that would be one thing that I would think that would be a good idea for us to be thinking about, is at least the transportation component is be thinking about the truckers. There's a lot of conversations about truckers these days, but really, if you don't have a trucker to move the product, we all will be having some issues here. So I at least appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I haven't heard anybody bring that up. That's super relevant. So thanks, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope anybody that listens or is listening to this and you have friends, colleagues, clients in this world, please share this podcast with them. Please connect with Lisa for additional information. But Lisa, once again, thank you so much. I think this has been really good. And maybe when we get back down to a 1 or 2 in terms of our pain in the supply chain, I can bring you back. But that seems like we have a little ways to go. But I really appreciate your time and insight and the knowledge that you were able to share with me and any of my listeners here today. So thank you so much. I will see you around the Provisors world, hopefully pretty soon. And I wish you a great rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
See you soon. Bye-bye.